Firefighter rescues a little boy from a fire, but everyone is shocked when the boy reveals Jake, a respected firefighter, faces his biggest challenge when he rescues a boy from a devastating fire. But what seemed like just another day at work turns into something much more sinister when the boy makes a shocking revelation. In a town where nothing is as it seems, Jake uncovers a web of lies and conspiracies. Who could be behind these mysterious acts? And how far is Jake willing to go? Jake quickly stood up when the alarm went off at the small Maplewood fire station, a quiet town in rural Georgia. It was a calm morning, and the unexpected call about a residential fire surprised everyone. The clock read 5:45 a.m. when the dispatcher reported a house on fire on Pine Street. Maplewood was known for its serene environment, with tree-lined streets and century-old wooden houses full of history. Jake, an experienced firefighter respected for his bravery, knew that every second was crucial. On the way to the scene, the sound of the sirens echoed through the deserted streets of the town. The city, still asleep, was bathed in the soft light of dawn, and the contrast between the peace of the streets and the emergency Jake was about to face was stark. He had faced many fires before, but the anxiety never diminished. The once tranquil and familiar streets now seemed distorted by urgency. When the truck arrived at the house, a chaotic scene unfolded. Flames danced violently through the windows, and thick smoke rose into the sky, obscuring the view. Frightened neighbors were outside, screaming for help and pointing to the second floor of the house. "There's someone inside," shouted a woman, visibly desperate. She held a child in her arms, her face marked by panic. Maplewood was a town where everyone knew each other, and the neighbors' despair reflected their fear of losing one of their own. Jake quickly donned his gear, tightening his helmet firmly. His colleagues began fighting the flames with hoses, but Jake knew his duty was to find and rescue anyone trapped inside the house. He ran toward the front door, which was partially blocked by debris. With a strong kick, he managed to open it and entered the smoke-filled house. Inside, the situation was even more terrifying. The house's structure was already beginning to give way, and the intense heat made breathing difficult. The walls, covered with old wallpaper, were now consumed by flames. Jake crouched down, staying close to the ground where the air was less dense. He called out loudly, hoping to hear a response, but all he heard was the crackling of flames and the creaking of burning wood. Finally, as he approached the stairs leading to the second floor, he heard a faint sound, a muffled cry. Jake didn't hesitate and climbed the stairs 2 at a time. When he reached the hallway, he spotted a small figure huddled in a corner near a window. It was a boy, no more than 8 years old, holding a blanket against his face. "I'm here to get you out of here," Jake said, trying to calm the boy. The intensity of the situation made his heart race, but he knew he needed to stay calm. The boy, who would later be identified as Tommy, looked at Jake with wide, fearful eyes but did not resist. Jake picked him up in his arms, protecting the boy's face from the smoke with his own body. The way back was even more dangerous, with the fire spreading rapidly, blocking the route Jake had entered through. The walls seemed to close in around him, with the heat making the air almost unbreathable. With no other option, Jake headed for the nearest window. He broke the glass with a chair and looked down, calculating the height. It wasn't a fatal drop, but it wouldn't be easy either. Jake wrapped Tommy in his coat and, with one last look around, jumped out the window, shielding the boy from the fall with his own body. They landed hard but safely on the lawn outside. The impact knocked the wind out of Jake's lungs, but he forced himself to stand. Tommy, still in shock, was immediately taken to an ambulance. The sound of applause and relieved cheers from the neighbors echoed around, but Jake was more focused on a persistent question in his mind. What could have caused such a devastating fire? The neighbors' faces reflected a mix of relief and horror, as if they all knew that something more was behind the tragedy. As he watched the house disintegrate in flames, Jake felt that something was strange about the incident. The houses in Maplewood were built to last, and fires of this magnitude were rare. However, for now, he focused on ensuring Tommy was safe. But in the back of his mind, the question remained, what or who had started that fire? Jake was sitting in the hospital waiting room, still sweating and smelling of smoke. The adrenaline from the rescue was beginning to wear off, leaving him exhausted, but he couldn't force himself to leave. He wanted to make sure Tommy was okay. The Maplewood Hospital was small, reflecting the town size, but the medical staff was known for their competence and dedication. Jake knew many of them personally, making the wait even more agonizing. Not long after, a doctor came out of the room where the boy was being treated and walked up to him. The hallway was silent, the sound of the doctor's footsteps echoing softly. "He'll be fine," the doctor said with a reassuring smile. "Some minor burns and a bit of smoke inhalation, but nothing serious. Thanks to you, he got out of this almost unscathed." Jake sighed in relief. Knowing Tommy was out of danger eased some of the tension he had felt since the beginning of the incident. However, the doctor's words didn't erase the doubts in his mind. Something didn't add up in that story, and he was determined to find out what it was. Why would such an old house catch fire so quickly and devastatingly? Shortly after, Tommy's mother arrived at the hospital, looking desperate and confused. She was a tired-looking woman, likely exhausted from the hard life that many families in Maplewood faced. When she saw Jake, she ran to him with tears in her eyes. Thank you for saving my son," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I was just doing my job," Jake replied modestly. "I'm glad he's okay." Tommy's mother was taken to the boy's room, where she hugged him tightly, relieved to see him safe and sound. Jake watched the scene from a distance, feeling a pang of sadness. He knew things could have ended very differently if he hadn't arrived in time. As he looked at the touching scene between mother and son, a nurse approached him. "The boy asked for you," she said. "It seems he wants to talk to you." Jake was surprised but accepted the invitation. He slowly walked to the room, where he found Tommy sitting on the bed, still holding the blanket he had brought with him during the rescue. The room was decorated with soft colors, trying to create a welcoming atmosphere for the hospitalized children. Tommy's mother smiled at Jake before leaving, giving them space to talk. Jake approached the bed and sat next to the boy, who seemed calmer but still visibly shaken. "Hi, Tommy," Jake said, trying to sound as comforting as possible. "How are you feeling?" "Better now," Tommy replied, his voice low and hesitant. He looked at Jake with a serious expression that didn't match his age. I wanted to thank you for getting me out of there." "You don't need to thank me, Tommy. It was a tough situation. But the important thing is that you're safe now." The boy nodded but didn't seem completely convinced. He looked at his hands, clutching the blanket tightly, and then, in a nearly inaudible voice, he murmured something that made Jake's heart stop for a moment. I saw someone setting the house on fire." Jake blinked, trying to process what he had just heard. Tommy's revelation caught him completely off guard. He hadn't expected to hear something like this, especially from such a young boy. The town of Maplewood, with all its calm and safety, never seemed like the kind of place where something so sinister could happen. "You saw someone, Tommy? Are you sure?" Jake asked, trying to stay calm. Tommy nodded again, this time with more determination. "Yes, I was sleeping when I heard a noise. When I went to see what it was, I saw someone in the living room, near the curtains. They had something in their hand, and then the fire started. I ran to my room and hid. I was too scared to come out." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. If what Tommy was saying was true, it changed everything. The fire hadn't been an accident. It was a deliberate act. Maplewood's tranquility now seemed like a facade, hiding something much darker. "Did you see who it was, Tommy?" Jake asked with the gentlest tone possible. The boy hesitated before answering. I think it was a man, but it was dark and I was too scared to see clearly. I just remember seeing the fire starting. Jake could see the fear in Tommy's eyes and knew that pressing him further could be counterproductive. He needed to proceed cautiously. What Tommy had revealed was alarming, and if someone was out there intentionally setting fires, it meant that others could be in danger as well. Tommy, I need you to promise me that you'll stay safe and talk to your mom about this. I'll take care of the rest, okay? Jake said, trying to calm the boy. In the days following the fire, Maplewood was gripped by a mixture of relief and unease. Relief that Tommy had been rescued in time, but unease over the mysterious circumstances surrounding the fire. Jake couldn't shake off what Tommy had revealed. He knew that, as a firefighter, his job was to put out flames, not investigate crimes. But the boy's story deeply troubled him. He felt responsible not only for Tommy's physical safety, but also for uncovering the truth behind what nearly cost the boy his life. Maplewood, usually a town where people left their doors unlocked and greeted neighbors with sincere smiles, now seemed different to Jake. He noticed worried faces on the streets, as if everyone was aware that something was wrong, but no one dared to talk about it. Jake decided to visit Tommy again at the hospital, this time to try to better understand what had happened that night. When he arrived, he found Tommy's mother in the hallway, talking to a nurse. She looked tired, her eyes marked by sleepless nights of worry. Jake, it's good to see you. Tommy has been talking a lot about you, the mother said, smiling with gratitude. Is he okay? Jake asked, concerned. He's recovering well, but since the fire, he's been a bit withdrawn. I've tried talking to him about what happened, but he shuts down every time I mention it. Jake nodded, understanding the situation. He knew he would need to approach Tommy with care. I'd like to talk to him if possible, Jake said, hoping the boy would be willing to open up again. Tommy's mother agreed, and Jake entered the boy's room. Tommy was sitting on the bed, playing distractedly with a toy car. When he saw Jake, his face lit up. Hi, Tommy. How are you? Jake asked, sitting next to the bed. Hi, Jake. I'm okay, the boy replied with a shy smile. Jake began talking to Tommy about trivial things, trying to put the boy at ease. After a few minutes, Jake decided it was time to address the real reason he had come. Tommy, I've been thinking a lot about what you told me about the fire, Jake began, keeping his tone gentle. I know you saw something that night. I know it can be scary to talk about it, but it's important that we understand what happened. Tommy lowered his head, playing with the toy car in his hands. Jake could tell the boy was struggling to find the courage to speak. I don't want anyone else to get hurt, Tommy finally said, his voice trembling. No one will get hurt, Tommy. I promise I'll protect you and your family. But I need you to help me understand what happened, Jake assured, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. Tommy looked at Jake, as if searching for some reassurance. Finally, he took a deep breath and began to speak. I was sleeping when I heard a strange noise. I thought it was Mom or Dad, so I went downstairs to check. That's when I saw a man in the living room, near the curtains. He was messing with something like lighting a match. I got scared and ran to my room. Jake listened attentively, every word from Tommy confirming his suspicions. Tommy's description was vague, but enough to raise alarms in Jake's mind. Did you see his face? Jake asked. Not very well. It was dark and I was too scared to look closely, but I think he was wearing a dark jacket and a cap. He seemed big, but I can't say more. Jake thanked Tommy for his courage in talking about it. The information was limited but enough to confirm his suspicions. The fire had been deliberately set, and the person responsible was still out there. He knew that Maplewood wasn't the safe and peaceful town everyone believed it to be. If someone was willing to set fire to a house with a child inside, that person was dangerous. After leaving the hospital, Jake went straight to the local police station. He knew he couldn't handle this alone. Upon arrival, he was greeted by the sheriff, a middle-aged man named Bill Carter, who seemed more interested in maintaining order in the town than investigating details. "Jake, good to see you. I heard you saved a boy from that terrible fire. Excellent work as always," the sheriff said, patting Jake on the shoulder. "Thanks, Sheriff, but I'm here because I need to talk to you about what really happened that night," Jake said, with a serious expression. The sheriff raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean by that?" Jake explained what Tommy had revealed, making it clear that the fire might have been intentional. However, the sheriff's reaction was not what he expected. "Jake, I know you care about the town, but sometimes kids imagine things. It could have been shadows, the shock, and if the house was old, it's possible there was an electrical short. I don't think we should jump to conclusions," the sheriff said, in a condescending tone. Jake felt frustrated. He sensed that his concerns were being dismissed, but he decided not to press further. He knew he needed more than a boy's account to convince the authorities to act. Leaving the station, he realized that if he wanted answers, he would have to find them on his own. Jake walked through the streets of Maplewood with a growing sense of unease. The town's apparent tranquility contrasted sharply with the suspicions swirling in his mind. He knew that something dark was hidden behind the fire that nearly took Tommy's life, and the sheriff's lack of action only reinforced his suspicions. Determined to uncover the truth, Jake began investigating on his own. In the following days, Jake started visiting the sites where other fires had recently occurred. Maplewood, though small, had seen an unusual increase in the number of fires in recent months. Most had been attributed to domestic accidents or electrical failures, but Jake now wondered if they could all have been deliberate acts. As he investigated, he noticed a pattern. All the fires seemed to have occurred in specific areas of the town, and the affected houses belonged to families that, in some way, were related to an old land dispute. Maplewood, with its old-fashioned and conservative small-town charm, had a complex history of land disputes dating back generations. Many of these properties were desired by construction companies, but local families refused to sell, keeping them as family heirlooms. Apparently, a local company, Harper Developments, had been trying to acquire properties in an area of the town for an expansion project. The company, run by Richard Harper, a well-known and influential businessman in the region, had a reputation for not taking no for an answer. However, many families had refused to sell, including Tommy's family. Intrigued, Jake decided to investigate Harper Developments further. He discovered that the company had faced several complaints in the past for dubious business practices, but all investigations had been quickly shelved. There were rumors that the company had close ties with local authorities, which would explain why so many complaints had been ignored. The town's property records, which Jake consulted with the help of a friend at the registry office, showed that many of the houses that had recently burned down were in areas of interest for Harper's project. Jake began gathering information and discreetly spoke with some fellow firefighters who had also noticed the strangeness of the recent fires. While most were reluctant to get involved, fearing retaliation, an older firefighter named Frank offered his help. Frank was a veteran nearing retirement but had a deep sense of justice. He was also troubled by the increase in fires and the apparent apathy of the authorities. "I always thought it was strange that these fires had such similar patterns," Frank said during a conversation at the fire station. "But I never had enough evidence to raise serious suspicions." "If you're right, Jake, we're dealing with something big." With Frank's help, Jake began to piece together the puzzle. They discovered that all the families affected by the fires were in negotiations with Harper Developments, and those who resisted the company's offers were the ones whose houses were destroyed. "This can't be a coincidence, Jake," Frank said as they analyzed the documents and maps they had collected. "Someone is using these fires to intimidate these families into selling." Jake agreed, and the situation seemed increasingly clear. What he still couldn't understand was why the local police seemed so uninterested. Determined to find out more, Jake started following the money. He tracked the financial movements of Harper Developments and discovered that the company had made substantial donations to the police department and other municipal authorities in recent years. These discoveries left Jake furious but also determined. He knew he couldn't trust local authorities to deliver justice. He and Frank would have to act on their own, and they needed to move quickly before more lives were put at risk. As they continued their investigations, Jake received a call from Tommy. The boy's voice was trembling, and he sounded more scared than ever. "Jake, I think someone's watching our house," Tommy said, with a tone of desperation. "Stay calm, Tommy. I'm coming over right now," Jake replied, feeling his heart race. When he arrived at Tommy's house, Jake realized the boy wasn't exaggerating. There was a car parked across the street with darkened windows. Jake tried to approach discreetly, but as soon as the driver realized he was being watched, he sped off. Jake knew this was no coincidence. He went back inside the house and found Tommy's mother terrified, trying to calm her son. "I don't know what to do anymore, Jake," she said, with tears in her eyes. "They're trying to force us out of here." Jake felt a wave of anger and concern. He needed to ensure Tommy and his family were safe, but he also knew he couldn't fight such a powerful enemy alone. "I'm going to protect you, Tommy, and I'm going to make sure these criminals are caught," Jake said, determined. "But you need to be careful. Avoid going out at night and keep the doors always locked. I'll take care of this." In the following days, Jake intensified his investigations. He and Frank began working in secret, gathering evidence and discreetly interviewing other affected families. With each new discovery, it became increasingly clear that there was a larger conspiracy at play, and Harper Developments was at the center of it. Jake knew he was approaching the point of no return. The evidence he and Frank had collected was damning, but they were still missing a key piece to take down the criminal scheme plaguing Maplewood. Without indisputable evidence, the authorities would continue to ignore the problem, and families like Tommy's would continue to live under constant threat. Frank suggested they seek help from someone outside, someone not involved with the local authorities. That's when Jake remembered Tom Reynolds, a retired detective he had worked with on some tough cases in the past. Tom was known for his integrity and his willingness to help, even when he no longer needed to. Jake called Tom, quickly explaining the situation and the suspicions he had raised. Tom was alarmed by what he heard and agreed to meet with Jake and Frank that same day. The meeting took place in a small cafe outside of Maplewood, away from prying eyes that could compromise the operation. Tom arrived with a serious expression, knowing that what he was about to hear could put everyone in danger. "Jake, if this is as big as it seems, you know we're not just dealing with a group of common criminals. This could involve powerful people," Tom said after hearing the full account. "I know, Tom, but I can't just ignore what's happening. These people are terrorizing entire families, and the police are involved in this. I have no choice but to act," Jake replied, determined. Tom nodded, recognizing Jake's courage. He suggested they start by investigating the leader of Harper Developments, Richard Harper. Richard was known in the town as a successful businessman, but Tom had his own suspicions. He had investigated Richard superficially years ago, but at the time, nothing concrete had emerged. "We need something solid, something that ties Richard directly to the fires," Tom said, thinking out loud. "We need him to confess, or someone close to him to do so." Jake agreed. They knew this would be dangerous, but they had no other choice. Tom suggested a more direct approach. Knowing that Richard was a vain and confident man, they decided to create a situation where he would feel safe enough to speak openly. In the following days, Jake, Frank, and Tom planned a complex operation. They decided that Jake would approach Richard under the pretext of wanting to sell his own house, pretending to be a victim of the pressure Harper Developments was exerting. The idea was for Jake, by showing despair and resignation, to make Richard open up and reveal details of his plan. Jake was nervous but knew it was their best chance. He arranged a meeting with Richard at a local restaurant under the pretense of discussing the terms of the sale. To ensure everything was recorded, Tom provided a listening device that Jake would wear during the meeting. On the day of the meeting, Jake met Richard at the restaurant, who seemed very at ease and even a bit disdainful. The place was frequented by important figures in the town, and Richard liked to flaunt his status. "So, Jake, finally decided to give in?" Richard asked with a satisfied smile. "I don't have much choice, do I?" Jake replied, trying to sound defeated. "Things have gotten tough, and I don't think I can fight this anymore." Richard looked at Jake with a mix of superiority and condescension. "It's the right choice. You'll see it's easier to just accept things as they are. And who knows, we might even negotiate a better price for your house," Richard said, leaning forward. Jake took the opportunity to bring up the other fires. He mentioned how he was afraid something similar could happen to his house. "Look, I don't want to end up like the others who refused to sell. I've heard terrible things about what happened to them," Jake said, in a nervous tone. Richard chuckled softly but didn't show surprise. On the contrary, he seemed almost pleased with the direction of the conversation. "Well, Jake, some people need a little push to understand what's best for them. And sometimes, a little accident helps speed things up." Jake felt his stomach churn. Richard's words confirmed his suspicions, but he needed more. "But what if someone finds out? This could end very badly for all of us," Jake said, trying to sound worried. "Don't worry, Jake. I have friends in the right places. No one will investigate too deeply. After all, who cares about a few old houses catching fire?" Richard replied, in a tone that showed total disdain. That was the confirmation Jake needed. Richard was confident in his impunity, believing no one would dare challenge him. Jake could barely contain his anger as he heard the veiled confession, but he knew he had to stay calm until the end of the meeting. After the meeting, Jake left the restaurant with his heart pounding. He knew he had obtained the evidence he needed, but now it was a matter of how to use it without putting himself or others at risk. Tom, who had been monitoring the conversation from outside, met Jake shortly afterward. "You did it, Jake. Now we need to act fast before he finds out what we did," Tom said, already starting to plan the next steps. With the recording of Richard Harper's confession in hand, Jake, Tom, and Frank knew there was no time to waste. The risk was high. If Richard discovered he had been recorded, he could use his contacts to further cover up his crimes or, worse, retaliate against those involved in the investigation. The tension was palpable, but the trio was determined to seek justice. Tom suggested they take the recording directly to the district attorney of the county, someone who had no ties to Maplewood and, therefore, would not be involved in the scheme. They decided to act quickly and discreetly, knowing that any leak of information could ruin everything. The next day, Tom arranged a meeting with the district attorney, a man named David Thornton, who was known for being incorruptible. During the meeting, Tom presented the evidence, including the recording that incriminated Richard Harper directly. The district attorney listened attentively, and with each word recorded, his expression grew darker. "This is very serious, Tom. If what you're saying is true, we have a huge case of corruption and crimes involving influential people. But we need to be extremely careful with the next step," David Thornton said, clearly aware of the implications. "I agree, David. We need to ensure nothing leaks and that all involved are caught by surprise. If we act quickly and in a coordinated manner, we can dismantle the entire operation," Tom replied. The district attorney agreed to initiate a secret investigation and prepare arrest warrants for Richard Harper and his accomplices, including those in local authorities who had facilitated the crimes. Meanwhile, Jake and Frank would continue gathering more evidence and ensuring the threatened families were safe. In the days that followed, the tension mounted. Jake kept in touch with Tommy and his mother, ensuring they were safe and asking them to stay vigilant. He knew that as long as Richard was free, they were in danger. Finally, the day of the operation arrived. With the warrants ready and the district attorney's team in position, Jake, Tom, and Frank prepared for the final phase of the plan. The operation was planned with precision, aiming to arrest all those involved simultaneously, minimizing the risk of anyone escaping or destroying evidence. As the team mobilized, Richard Harper was in his mansion, unconcerned, believing his secrets were safe. Harper's mansion, located in the most privileged area of Maplewood, was a symbol of his power and influence. He believed no one would dare touch him in his kingdom. The sudden arrival of the police caught him completely off guard. He tried to argue, denying the accusations, but the recording presented as evidence was indisputable. Richard was arrested, as were several of his accomplices at Harper Developments and in local authorities. Meanwhile, Jake monitored the operation from afar, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. He knew the fight wasn't over, but this was a big step in the right direction. Days later, news of Richard Harper's arrest and the discovery of the arson scheme spread through the town and the county. Maplewood was in shock, and the revelations triggered a wave of indignation among the residents. Many couldn't believe that someone so influential could be behind such horrendous crimes. With the evidence gathered by Jake, Frank, and Tom, the case against Richard and his accomplices was solid. The district attorney, David Thornton, ensured that all involved would face justice without concessions. As the case progressed, the town began to recover. The families that had been targeted by Richard Harper received support from the community, and trust in the authorities began to be restored. Jake, in turn, was widely recognized as the hero who not only saved Tommy from a fire, but also dismantled a criminal network that threatened the entire town. Tommy and his mother, finally free from fear, were able to return to their normal lives. Grateful, they considered Jake as part of the family. Jake's courage and determination inspired many in the town, showing that justice can prevail even in the most difficult circumstances. As a reward for his bravery and exceptional work, Jake was promoted to captain of the Maplewood Fire Department. He accepted the position with humility, knowing that despite the challenges, he had fulfilled his mission to protect his community. Over time, Maplewood began to rebuild itself, not just physically but also morally. Richard Harper's case became an example for the town and a reminder that when brave people unite for a greater good, evil has no chance of prevailing. However, Jake knew that the battle for justice never truly ends. There would always be new challenges, new threats, but he was ready to face them, confident that with determination and community support, any obstacle could be overcome.